In January 1933, Germany was exhausted, not just economically, not just politically, but psychologically. 3 years of mass unemployment, collapsing governments, street violence, and parliamentary paralysis had left the republic hollow. The country no longer believed its leaders could fix anything, and the leaders no longer believed they could govern without bypassing the system. Into this vacuum stepped a group of conservative elites, aging aristocrats, industrial magnates, generals, and political dealmakers who believed they still controlled Germany's destiny. What they did not realize was that their world was already ending. The key figure among them was Franz von Papen, a former chancellor who had lost the trust of the public but retained influence among conservative circles. Papen sought a return to power through alliance rather than election. His idea was bold, risky, and disastrously naive. Bring Adolf Hitler into the government, but place him under conservative control. To Papen and his allies, Hitler was not yet a dictator. He was a political weapon, loud, energizing, useful, but ultimately controllable. They admired the discipline of the Nazi movement, the scale of its rallies, and its ability to mobilize millions of desperate voters. They also feared civil unrest if Hitler remained excluded from power much longer. But above all, they believed that once in office, Hitler would need them, the aristocratic elites, the bureaucrats, the generals, to run the state. They could not have been more wrong. By late 1932, the situation had become critical. Hitler's party had become the largest in the Reichstag, but he had no majority. He demanded the chancellorship, yet President Paul von Hindenburg refused. Hindenburg, a decorated field marshal of the First World War, despised Hitler. He saw him as a vulgar agitator, unfit to lead a great nation. That bohemian corporal, he called him. But despite his disdain, Hindenburg was 85 years old, physically weak, and surrounded by advisors who were increasingly panicked by the political deadlock. Papen exploited this environment masterfully. Working behind the scenes, he convinced Hindenburg that Hitler could be boxed in. The conservatives would hold the key ministries. Papen would serve as vice-chancellor. Only a minority of cabinet seats would go to the Nazis. In Papen's eyes, Hitler would be chancellor in name, but real authority would remain in conservative hands. The industrialists added pressure. Many believed the Nazis were the only movement capable of destroying the influence of trade unions and suppressing communism. They financed Nazi propaganda, paid for their political campaigns, and urged the President Eserkal to bring Hitler into the government. Meanwhile, Germany was sinking deeper into chaos. Street battles between Nazi stormtroopers and communist fighters grew so frequent that death reports became routine. The economy showed no sign of recovery. Trust in democratic institutions evaporated. In this environment, even Hindenburg's resistance began to weaken. The final push came in January 1933. Papen, along with other conservative leaders, such as Alfred Hugenberg, presented Hindenburg with a plan. Hitler would become chancellor, but the conservatives would dominate the cabinet and guide him. They insisted this arrangement would calm the streets, restore order, and end the political stalemate. Hindenburg hesitated, but with no functioning majority in parliament, no effective chancellor, and rising fears of civil conflict, he agreed. On January 30th, 1933, in a quiet, almost anticlimactic ceremony at the presidential palace, Adolf Hitler was sworn in as Chancellor of Germany. No cheering crowds, no dramatic takeover, no moment of revolutionary triumph. Just a handshake, a photograph, and a set of signatures on official papers. Outside, the Nazi movement exploded into celebration. Torches lit the night. Marching columns filled the streets. Music echoed through the capital. Many Germans felt relief finally. a government that promised action. Others felt dread, a sense that something irreversible had just happened. But few realized the full significance of the day. Inside the palace, Papen congratulated himself on his masterstroke. "We have hired Hitler," he told colleagues. "Within 2 months, we will have him in our pocket." It was one of the greatest miscalculations in modern history. Hitler did not see himself as a guest of the conservatives, nor as their puppet. He saw the chancellorship as the first essential step toward total power, a legal doorway through which he would walk, then lock behind him forever. The Weimar Republic still existed on paper, but its fate was sealed the moment the oath was spoken. Germany had not been seized by a revolution. It had been handed away piece by piece, mistake by mistake, deal by deal. And in the coming months, Hitler would dismantle every remaining barrier between himself and absolute authority. The command tent emptied slowly, officers dispersing to their sectors, each carrying fragments of Manstein's new operational vision. Outside, engines roared to life. Runners sprinted between units, the air thick with urgency. Hans remained where he stood, not dismissed, not excused, still under the gaze of a general who rarely wasted a second on those he considered irrelevant. Manstein studied the updated map, hands behind his back, posture razor sharp. "Lieutenant Weber," he said without turning, "walk with me." Hans followed him outside. The cold early morning light cut through the fog. Manstein walked with a precise, measured stride, every step calculated, like the moves of a grandmaster in a deadly game. 1. Understanding the enemy. Manstein paused near a camouflaged command vehicle. Inside, a huge aerial reconnaissance map flickered under a dim lamp. He pointed at the Soviet defensive layout trenches, armor clusters, supply routes. "Tell me," Manstein said, "what do you see here?" Hans leaned in. His throat tightened. This wasn't a test. This was an examination by one of the most brilliant operational minds alive. "They are strengthening the southern ridgeline," Hans said slowly, but not uniformly. "Their left support flank is shallow, too shallow. If they are preparing for a defensive stand," he hesitated. "Continue," Manstein urged, not looking away from the map. "They expect us to attack forward, where their armor is thickest, because it's the logical move. But their preparations on the ridge show something else. They're worried about exposure." They were reacting, not dictating. Manstein smiled faintly, the kind of smile that could slice steel. "Exactly. The Soviets are thinking like predictable men." He straightened, looking directly at Hans. "That is why we must think like unpredictable ones." His tone sharpened. "War is not simply force. It is timing, deception, pressure, and the ability to stay 2 thoughts ahead of the enemy." Hans nodded, absorbing every word. He felt like he was being pulled into a higher level of warfare, one he'd never seen from the trenches. 2. A dangerous assignment. Manstein closed the map board. "I need confirmation before I commit the entire corps," he said. "You will lead a reconnaissance team to the southern ridge. Quiet, fast, and invisible." Hans froze. "General, the ridge is heavily monitored by Soviet snipers." "I know," Manstein answered calmly. "That is why I am sending someone who sees what others miss." Hans had no reply. His hands felt cold. Manstein stepped closer. "War rewards those who risk, but punishes those who hesitate." He lowered his voice. "Return with accurate intelligence, and you will not remain a lieutenant for long." It wasn't flattery. It wasn't encouragement. It was a promise and a warning. 3. Preparing for the impossible. 30 minutes later, Hans met with a small reconnaissance detachment assigned to him. 4 men: Keller, the silent marksman Bräunig, the radio operator Oscar, an experienced scout; Vogel, demolitions and close quarters expert. They studied the ridge on a field map, its steep sides covered with forest and Soviet listening posts. Keller shook his head. They'll hear a twig break from 100 meters away. Oscar added, and if they spot us, they'll send patrols. Fast ones. Hans inhaled slowly. I know, he said, but we're not going to move like a patrol. We're going to move like shadows. He pointed to a narrow valley run a blind spot between two Soviet observation towers. This is our entry. We move at dusk. Stay low. No noise. No lanterns. Our goal isn't combat. It's confirmation. Breinig asked, confirmation of what exactly? Hans repeated Manstein's words, whether the Soviets are reacting or preparing to strike first. The men exchanged worried glances. Because if the Soviets were preparing a preemptive attack, everything Manstein has planned, the German defensive line, their very lives could collapse before the new operation even began. Hans folded the map. Get your gear. We leave in 2 hours. As the men dispersed, Hans allowed himself one deep breath, the only moment of hesitation he'd permit. This mission could kill them, but failing it could kill thousands. And somewhere behind the front lines, a German general waited for his report quiet, calculating, expecting nothing less than absolute clarity. Hans tightened his gloves. It was time to move. Soviet 62nd Army Field Headquarters, Southern Ridge Sector, year 7:10 a.m. The low winter sun cast a pale orange glow over the battered tree line. Smoke drifted from shell craters that dotted the hillside like old scars. Inside a crude bunker, reinforced with planks and frozen earth, Captain Mikhail Sokolov studied a half-torn operational map. He was not a man easily rattled. He had served in the Tsar S Army before the revolution survived the Civil War, and now stood as one of the Red Army's most reliable intelligence officers. But today, something felt off, very off. 1. A pattern in the chaos. Sokolov leaned over the map table while a cold draft crept through the gaps in the bunker walls. A young signals officer, Private Leonid, stood at attention beside him, clutching a stack of decoded radio intercepts. Sokolov asked without looking up, Activity? From the German right flank? Leonid nodded. Minimal troop movement, Tovarish Kapitan. But radio silence increased. Sokolov stopped marking the map. Radio silence. The Germans rarely went quiet, unless they were preparing something. He took the intercept sheets and scanned them. Most were background chatter, encrypted field updates, logistical requests, but then he saw a sequence of short signals, repeated irregularly. Too irregular. He tapped the paper. This is not routine. Leonid swallowed. Is it preparation for an offensive? Sokolov didn't reply. His eyes drifted toward the bunker entrance, where the wind carried faint echoes from the forest below. Possibly, he said at last. And if it is, we are blind. 2. The ridge. A knife's edge. Sokolov stepped outside, pulling his heavy coat tighter. The southern ridge stretched out before him, complex, treacherous, and dangerously exposed. Soviet observation towers stood like skeletal silhouettes against the morning sky. He walked toward Observation Post 14, where 2 scouts were on duty. Sergeant Karitonov, an older soldier with a scar across his jaw, snapped to attention. At ease, Sokolov said. Report. Karitonov lowered his binoculars. Quiet night. Too quiet. Movement in the valley, but distant. Hard to tell if it was patrols, animals, or something else. Something else, Sokolov repeated. He knew what that meant. German reconnaissance. If German eyes were on the ridge, it meant the ridge mattered. He turned to the younger scout, Vasya, barely 18, still with frost crusting his eyelashes. Did you see any light signals? No, Tovarish Kapitan. But the boy hesitated. But what? I heard branches breaking. Very soft. Not close. Just enough to know someone was there. Sokolov stared at him. Most officers would dismiss the boy's intuition. Sokolov would not. He placed a hand on Vasya's shoulder. If you heard it, then assume the enemy is already studying us. The boy nodded, trying to steady his breathing. 3. Orders. From above. A distant engine rumbled. A truck approached the ridge road, tires crunching through frozen mud. An NKVD officer stepped out, Major Yuri Antonov, known for his sharp uniform and even sharper temperament. He approached Sokolov. "Captain," Antonov said curtly, "a directive from Front Command." Sokolov accepted the sealed paper, broke the wax stamp, and read. Antonov watched him. "You do not look pleased." Sokolov folded the document carefully. "They believe the Germans are preparing a multi-stage offensive," he said. "They want immediate verification of troop movements along the ridge and the valley corridor." Antonov raised an eyebrow. "Verification? That sounds like your specialty." Sokolov nodded reluctantly. "Yes, but verification requires risk." Antonov smirked. "In war, everything requires risk." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Be careful, Sokolov. Intelligence officers who bring warnings too early are ignored." He paused. "Those who bring them too late are replaced." Sokolov understood the implication. The NKVD expected results, correct ones, and soon. 4. The first ominous sign. As Antonov departed, Sokolov prepared to return to HQ when a sudden crack echoed across the ridge. A single gunshot. Then silence. Scouts dropped behind sandbags. Observers raised their binoculars. The forest edge remained eerily still. Karatanov murmured, "That was no one of ours." Sokolov scanned the tree line. No muzzle flash. No movement. Just absence. Something or someone had fired a warning shot. A probe. A test. Sokolov exhaled slowly. "The Germans are closer than we thought." He turned to his scouts. "Double the watch. Silent signals only. If you see movement, do not engage. I want eyes, not bodies." Karatanov nodded, already barking orders. Sokolov headed back to the bunker at a fast walk. The ridge was shifting. The Germans were moving, and he could feel it in his bones. This was the calm before something significant, something large, something engineered by a mind that understood war as deeply as he did. Manstein. Sokolov didn't yet know the name, but soon he would.